Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. We're here on this very chilly morning with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who is making his first appearance on a Sunday show since the election. Welcome, Mr. Leader.
Good morning.
Let's start with the Russian efforts to meddle in the U.S. election.
Yeah.
You've strongly condemned those efforts. Why do you think Donald Trump has not?
Oh, look, I think the best way to look at the president-elect's attitude toward the Russians is to look at the incoming national security leaders, General Mattis, General Kelly, Congressman Pompeo, Senator Coates. None of these are people who are in any way conflicted about the view that the Russians are not our friends and are a big problem. I don't think it's all that unusual for a new president to want to get along with the Russians. I remember George W. Bush having the same hope. My suspicion is these hopes will be dashed pretty quickly. The Russians are clearly a big adversary, and they demonstrated it by trying to mess around in our election.
Do you think, given the findings of the intelligence agencies, the most recent briefing on Friday to President-elect Trump, that he should say, sort of, I agree now with what you found, that there's any damage that's been done by his skepticism of these findings and with the intelligence agencies?
Look, I'm not going to critique his performance. What I will tell you is that I accept what the intelligence community has unanimously agreed to, that they were trying to affect the election, that they naively, in my view, thought that somehow they'd be advantaged if Donald Trump were to be elected. I think that was a bad bet. And that it really, in the end, made no difference, that there's no evidence whatsoever that it changed the outcome of the election.
Let me switch to Obamacare. Why do you think they were naive in wanting Donald Trump to be elected?
Well, look at the national security team.
Yeah.
I mean, these are clear-eyed people who understand fully that the Russians are not our friends.
Let me switch to Obamacare. There is a question of, you want to repeal it. You're going to repeal it. When's the replacement part going to get put in?
Soon. I mean, you have to both repeal and replace, and I think there ought not to be a great gap between the first step and the second. Look, you know, Bill Clinton said it's the craziest thing you've ever seen. This is Bill Clinton on Obamacare last year. 8 out of 10 Americans either want it replaced entirely or significantly changed. I don't think anybody ought to think that the status quo is acceptable. If Hillary Clinton had been elected, they'd be revisiting Obamacare. It is in a full-scale meltdown, and so no action is not an option.
So 8 and 10 want it repealed, but also only 2 and 10 want it just repealed. In other words, repeal without replace.
Well, I said 8 and 10 either want it repealed or significantly changed.
Right.
That's 8 out of 10.
I guess the gap is where the debate is, and Senator Rand Paul said he spoke to the president-elect, and quoting now from Rand Paul, he said he, meaning Mr. Trump, fully supports my plan to replace Obamacare the same day we repeal it. The time to act is now. You talked about a gap. This is the same day. How does
I haven't heard Senator Paul's plan to replace it, but we will be replacing it rapidly after repealing it.
So can you give me a sense of what rapidly means? Are we talking
very quickly?
Months, days?
Quickly.
All right. But it's going to be repealed by the end of this week, you think? The
first step will be taken in the Senate by the end of this week, yes, and then it'll go over to the House.
On replacing it, if I'm covered now as a part of Obamacare, am I going to be covered by the replacement?
Well, what you need to understand is that there are 25 million Americans who aren't covered now. If the idea behind Obamacare was to get everyone covered, that's one of the many failures. In addition to premiums going up, co-payments going up, deductibles going up, and many Americans who actually did get insurance when they did not have it before have really bad insurance that they have to pay for, and the deductibles are so high that it's really not worth much to them. So it is chaotic. The status quo is simply unacceptable, and at the risk of being repetitious, if Hillary Clinton had been elected, we'd be revisiting Obamacare.
Let me move on to nominees. The Office of Government Ethics has asked the Senate to slow down the confirmation process. The executive director wrote, "I'm not aware of any occasion in the 4 decades since OGE was established when the Senate held a confirmation hearing before the nominees had completed the ethics review process." Will you slow down the process?
Well, we're still in the process of getting the papers in. I think at least 5 of the nominees have all of their papers in. You know, what this is about, John, that Democrats are really frustrated that they lost the election. I was in Senator Schumer's position 8 years ago. I know how it feels when you're coming into a new situation that the other guys won the election. What did we do? We confirmed 7 cabinet appointments the day President Obama was sworn in. We didn't like most of them either, but he won the election. So all of these little procedural complaints are related to their frustration at having not only lost the White House, but having lost the Senate. I understand that, but we need to sort of grow up here and get past that. We need to have the president's national security team in place on day one, and papers are still coming in, and so I'm optimistic that we'll be able to get up to 7 nominees on day one, just like we did 8 years ago.
Should it be a rule that the papers come in and then you have the hearing?
Well, on Hillary Clinton, for example, we had a hearing before her FBI report was completed. The real thing is the vote on the floor, and we want to have all the records in, that all the papers completed before they're actually confirmed on the Senate floor.
So nothing's slowing down? Nothing's slowing down in terms of the
No, I don't
confirmation
think
here.
so. I mean, we want to treat, they should want to treat President-elect Trump just like we treated President-elect Obama.
Wouldn't their response be there's a qualitative difference between the Obama nominees and the Trump nominees? You've got people here who have these big private industry successes, but also a lot of complexity.
Well, I could have made that same argument 8 years ago.
Were they as complex back
Well,
then?
they were wildly liberal people.
Well, that's ideology, though.
Yeah, but what's the difference? I mean, we found most of his cabinet appointments is just as disturbing as they would find President Trump's. And that's what happens when you lose the election.
I guess what Democrats would say is that these are ethical questions, and they would say, and I bet they would quote you back from your book about the Senate, which is that the Senate, as you say, there's a value to slow and steady deliberation.
Yeah, most of the time that's true. But if you've got a brand new administration coming into office, you want to have, at the very least, a national security team in place on day one. And I'm hopeful and optimistic that that will be the case this time as well.
And what's your relationship like with Chuck Schumer on working out these issues?
Oh, it's fine. I mean, I like Chuck. We don't have a problem. He has a job to do, and I have a job to do. And I think he's got a little harder job to do right now in trying to convince people we ought to slow down and impede the new administration getting up and running.
All right. Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, thank you so much for being with us.